Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Jody Jacobson Fry, and I'm the co-chair of the Workplace Suicide Prevention and Postvention Committee with Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas. Very excited today to welcome you to our webinar on using mental health and suicide prevention programs to bolster DEI and A culture to attract and retain talent with Dan Lester, VP of Field Culture and Inclusion at Clayco. Dan is a certified psychological safety coach, as well as a certified construction suicide prevention trainer. He's the executive sponsor of the Clayco Ground Crew and also a national motivational speaker. As a thought leader, he trains and focuses on endeavors that affect employees' mental health and psychological safety within job site culture and to help make them more inclusive. We're very excited to have Dan, who also is a trainer and mental health first aider. So for those of you that are new to the guidelines, our national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention are supported through a collaboration with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and United Suicide Survivors International. Our guidelines are founded on 8 guiding principles. All of these actually are critically important for the topic that we're going to discuss today. We also try to make it very easy to put these practices into play. So we have 9 practices that stem upstream, as you can see, leadership, job strain reduction and communication, midstream practices like self-care, training, and peer support, and downstream or crisis resources, including mitigating risk and crisis response. Today's talk is actually going to touch on a number of these different practices that we think are important to integrate DE&I throughout all of the principles and practices of the guidelines. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan Lester today to guide us through and share some of his wisdom on implementing some of these practices. Thank you, Dan, for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be with this group. Today, we're going to go over relevant mental health suicide-related data to the construction industry, which isn't much different from other industries, but we certainly have one of the highest suicide rates in construction, unique challenges that are impacting diverse talent pools, and then discuss the importance of including culturally responsive methods into the mental health programs that we create that can help us kind of get to a better place of recruitment, retention, and hopefully belonging with individuals into our organizations. When you look at this picture, you see a guy. This is me back in college, but you might see a football player, you might see a man or an athlete, you might see somebody who's been a champion. I was once I used to hold 2 records at the school where I was. But it's not always about what somebody is. Those things are what I am. I am a football player. I'm a man. I won championships. I've held records. I've been a coach, been a father. I'm a son. I'm a brother. And I'm also a Black man. And so oftentimes when we're engaging with each other, we oftentimes want to know what you do. You meet somebody, hi, your name is whatever. Now, what do you do? It's about what you do, not who you are. Well, who this gentleman was at the time, he was a gentleman struggling significantly with mental health challenges, who was struggling with his value and his identity based on some of the experiences he had had in his life. At this point in time, I was in my last year of playing football at the university I was going to, and I was really struggling to find who I was. At this point, I had already been through suicide ideation. I had mental health depression episodes and survived those things and trying to find my way out. And oftentimes, those things were kind of embellished or kind of made more difficult because of the background, the stresses of coming from dealing with racism, discrimination, judgment, and just having to even try to fight against those things. So it's not always about what we are, but maybe thinking about who we are and do we see people for who they really are. I wanted to show this graph done by the American Psychological Association, and it talked about stress and health disparities, and talking about that when you have race and ethnicity in our environments, you have a higher threat exposure to safety, achievement, and inclusion. And this is across your lifespan. What they've really tied this to down deeper is that it leads to harsher parenting, sometimes child maltreatment, violence exposure, barriers to employment, discrimination, all leading to, again, a greater level of stress exposure. When you look at the social classes, right? So it's not just one side of it, but it's also socioeconomically dealing with those conversations and dealing with gaps in resources and services across across the environments. You also then have impairments to education and limitations to relationships and marriage rates and income and educational assets, again, leading to a higher level of threat exposure. When we start to look at the job challenges in the construction industry specifically, I've only pulled these out for us to look at in this industry specifically, we start to see that, wow, when they did a study, they found out that the percentage of apprentices who are the new people entering the industry of construction, they have a harassment and discrimination, that have experienced harassment, discrimination, or discrimination by gender or race. You start to look at the numbers. And so you'll see that women of color have the highest rate of discrimination, women in general are higher, and then men of color have high discrimination rates. Several, double-digit data points, double-digit percentage points higher than the predominant group that works in our construction industry, which is white males. According to our survey of the construction dive did, that they really found out that a lot of the folks that were surveyed have experienced significant racism, witnessed a significant racism on job sites. They have been a victim of racism or an act of a construction site. There were 78% of those folks. Was anything done to fix the situation? Only 23% said that they had anything that was done about the situation. And so when you start looking at the 33% that have witnessed the racist acts, and you look at the lower numbers, we start finding out opportunities for us to really engage with unique populations. And when we start tying this in, when you say, well, Dan, why does psychological safety matter? Well, people don't share about their mental health challenges because of the shame and the stigma. If I'm already dealing with the shame and the stigma of just telling people who I am, imagine telling people who you are and adding on that you're a woman or adding on that you're a male from a diverse background, and you start dealing with those challenges of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and finding that you really may not have everything that you need. So you don't talk about it because you can't get help, because people are oftentimes telling you that you don't have value based on how you show up, based on just who you are. There's no value. And so you can't get the help that you need because you don't feel safe to share what you need to share. And that crosses all color barriers, crosses all ethnic, gender barriers, all other barriers. These things are important to realize what we are. And if you look at the last one, dealing with information where we say that people just don't get access to it. So oftentimes you have the tools and necessary resources necessary, but you don't know how to access the care. Studies have shown that when folks that are from diverse backgrounds present into our environments and workplaces, they oftentimes are not given the same information because people are not engaging with them the same way as they have engaged with others in the past. So let's look at things that we can do from an action step perspective. This is just, again, on construction sites, that same group that was surveyed, things that they can do. You can hire more people from underrepresented groups. You have to be intentional about how you start to do it. Representation matters, and it certainly matters when you see people like you that are doing well or thriving and surviving in organizations, because you know that you can achieve and that all your work is not for nothing. Certainly start providing training that is anti-bias specific, but it's not always about, don't do, really kind of helping people get to a place where you can be more collaborative and think about ways to identify those opportunities and then act upon them. Certainly prioritizing your diversity and inclusion initiatives every single day, not to be wavered by the political challenges or the political narratives. What we're seeing politically is that things are happening in one direction. However, business and industry is moving the opposite direction and moving toward people, because our people are the ones that make us better. And you offer toolbox talks, offer resources to folks, report incidences that rise to the level of criminal activity to the police. When we start talking about ways that we can engage, One way that we can engage is to advocate for somebody. If you see somebody who has never been given an opportunity before, you advocate for them to get that opportunity. When you see somebody that needs the opportunity to share and engage, you use your status and you recognize and address the unjust omissions and say, this is not okay. I'm in a position where I can fix it. Let's look at an opportunity. Or ask the questions, right? Hey, would it be more helpful if, what about if we put somebody up here? I think it'll be a great opportunity for them to show their leadership. All right, similar, and it takes us to the next level, right? You sponsor and support somebody from underrepresented groups intentionally, and especially in situations that will boost their standing. Oftentimes we see this kind of challenge where people see folks doing well and they say, well, you've got a little bit, so you don't need more. Well, you see people doing well, you want to encourage that, right? Positive reinforcement. We do that with our children. We don't tell them you learned how to walk. Now you should never be praised for walking again, or you should never be praised for doing something good again because we've told you one time. Give people an opportunity, sponsor them upwards, and try to find ways where you can put somebody on and sponsor them and really be the person who is standing and supporting them and giving them every opportunity to be successful in your organizations. And that certainly definitely helps to, again, bring the mental health challenges down, brings those groups. What we're noticing right now is that some of the higher populations experiencing suicide rates are those from diverse backgrounds because, again, they're not getting access to those resources. Last thing, and I'll finish up with this, is be able to take a stand, right? So that when you see something, you say something. Don't stand by, stand up and stand in the gap for somebody when it needs to be helpful. It means something when you're struggling and somebody steps in the gap for you. That diminishes mental health challenges when you know you don't have to fight that battle by yourself. We all need help, and sometimes we have not necessarily broadened our view to realize that help can be done when we engage these different communities. And so when you look at the cross section of mental health programs, we have seen lots of work done recently on mental health programming and all these unique opportunities and suicide prevention programming done. It's great, but they are not necessarily spending intentional focus on including people from those diverse backgrounds. Let's work to include those folks from diverse backgrounds, because when we do, it will allow them to be a lot better and allow them to really survive in our environments. And we can stop wasting time on continuing to recruit for that revolving door after 3 years, where those minority talents figure out that they're no longer welcome or they were never welcomed, and take a different stand. I've included here a few resources that I pulled from on some of the statistics and the data from, so that you all can check them out. There are unique opportunities for us to really engage and dive deeper into the work that is being done around these topics. So at the end of the day, if we see people for who they are, not necessarily how they've presented, you are more than your status, you are more than your color, your skin tone, you are more than your gifts and your talents and your accolades. You are a human, you are a person, and you are valuable, and you are worth living, you're worth fighting to live for. And that's what people need to hear. And it really would benefit us to continue to engage and connect with those diverse groups intentionally as we engage with our mental health program.
Dan, I just want to say thank you for sharing some of the experience and the work that you've been doing in this area with us today, and really helping to solidify how to change verbal thoughts or being a verbal ally into action. And I love the last slide, moving from an advocate to standing up and really being very intentional about how to take the practices and to put them into play and make them really powerful as a motivator for change, not just providing lip service, but changing lip service into action. For those of you that would like to see what some of the next steps are, I encourage you to visit us at www.workplacesuicideprevention.com, where you can learn to be part of the solution and take a pledge to make suicide prevention a health and safety priority for your workplace or your professional organization. So thank you again.